There are two things to note at this stage. One is that the system worked. Many people were afraid that the US would interfere, the Chinese would interfere, or that there would be chaos and violence and so forth. None of that happened. A very complex system worked under extremely difficult conditions of the highest rate of pandemic cases that we've had. That's remarkable and shows that democracy works in that sense. The other thing, though, that's very interesting is that the country is still very much divided. The results are very close to what they were in 2016, though in this case, with Biden slightly ahead instead of Trump slightly ahead. The one big change thus far is Arizona went from Republican to Democrat, but otherwise the divisions are pretty much the way they were in 2016. I think the election is one of the most important elections because it is such a high turnout, and it is essentially a reaffirmation or a turning point on a presidency which has been very different from prior presidencies in terms of its style and also in its foreign policy. So I think it will be seen as a very important election. I think it will be regarded as one of the more important elections of the last century. If you look at the foreign policy implications, the Trump administration is the first presidency since 1945 that has called into question what's sometimes called the liberal international order, or the set of multilateral institutions and alliances that the United States created after 1945. In my book, De Moral's Manner, I point out that this was a big turning point in 2016. What we don't know is whether that turning point will be reversed. For example, Biden has said that if he is elected, he will rejoin the Paris Climate Accords and rejoin the World Health Organization, and would probably strengthen NATO. If Trump is reelected, you will probably see a continuation of the trends you've seen for the past 4 years. So in that sense, I think it will matter a fair amount in terms of America's position in the world. And in terms of domestic policy, I think what you'll see is probably a situation where there won't be a lot of change. Well, many people have argued that because the pandemic is such a big event, that it will have big causes or big effects on geopolitics. And I've argued that it's not necessarily true. For example, a century ago, you had the great influenza of 1918, which killed more people than COVID has, and which killed more people indeed than World War I killed. And yet it didn't really change geopolitics. What changed geopolitics in the 1920s and 30s was the effects of World War I, not the effects of the pandemic. So we don't know whether the pandemic will have major geopolitical effects, but I suspect that they'll just continue existing trends, which includes some degree of economic deglobalization, which will have basically a continuing worsening of U.S.-China relations, which was already underway before the pandemic. So there'll be some accentuation of existing trends, but the big question is this going to be the turning point in which China replaces the United States as the leading country? And I think the answer to that is clearly no. The United States still has in terms of military power. It spends 3 times as much as China, and it has a global reach that China doesn't have. President Trump had a negative effect on American soft power. If you look at public opinion polls, for example, taken by Pew or by Gallup, which are very reputable polling organizations, they show that after 2017, Trump's rather narrow approach to America first and transactional approach, turning away from multilateral institutions and alliances, led to a reduction in the attractiveness of the United States in a majority of countries. Not every country, but in a majority of countries. And I think in that sense there's been a reduction of American soft power. Whether that would continue or whether it would recover is an open question. I suspect that if Biden replaces Trump, you'll see polls showing a recovery of American soft power. If Biden does not replace Trump, if Trump is reelected, then I think you'll continue to see the same trend that you've seen for the last 4 years. I doubt there'll be violence because if you look at the period before, the few days before the election, there were people predicting violence. Some storefronts put plywood over their windows in some cities, but that turned out to be not the case. Well, Trump said last night that he intended to take this to the Supreme Court. It's not clear what legal standing he would have for this. There is a case in which the Supreme Court looked at the decision of the Pennsylvania courts to allow absentee ballots to be counted if they were postmarked by Election Day, to allow them to be counted for 3 days. Trump and the Republicans challenged this. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court upheld it, and the United States Supreme Court left the case undecided. In other words, they didn't take it up as a case to try to reverse the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. I think there's going to be less change in policy toward Taiwan if Biden wins than people fear. In other words, I think you're going to see pretty much the same policy, whether it's Trump or whether it's Biden. Basically, no de facto, no formal declaration of independence by Taiwan, but no use of force, and the relations between Taiwan and the mainland should be handled by negotiations or discussions by the two sides across the Taiwan Strait. That's been the American position, and I don't think that is going to change.